Why are so many men withdrawing from love, not with rage, not with drama, but with a quiet, aching disappearance? Not long ago, love was seen as a rite of passage. Now, it's often a battlefield where many modern men are waving the white flag, not because they don't want connection, but because they've come to fear what it costs. Psychologists call it relational burnout. Philosophers like Kierkegaard called it something else, existential despair. Because when a man starts questioning whether love is worth the rejection, the ridicule, the performance, he doesn't scream, he retreats. And here's the disturbing part. Many of these men still crave love deeply, but they've stopped trusting it. Not because of some red pill ideology, but because love in its modern form often demands that they betray the one thing they were taught to protect at all costs, their inner silence. If this made you pause, you're not alone. Hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who feels what they can't say. We're about to unpack the dark psychology behind why so many men are walking away from love and what it reveals about our collective emotional crisis. He didn't leave with a slammed door. He didn't cheat. He didn't even ghost you. He just faded. One day he stopped initiating, stopped reaching out, stopped hoping. He still shows up to work, still pays his bills. He laughs with friends, scrolls through dating apps. But something's missing. Not on the outside, on the inside. It's the part of him that used to believe in connection, that used to fantasize about love, partnership, a shared life. Now, that part is quietly gone. This is the new epidemic no one wants to talk about. Emotionally available, self-aware, decent men quietly exiting the game of love. No loud manifesto, no misogynistic tirade, just an invisible withdrawal. You might not notice it at first, because these men don't announce their exit. They still go on dates, still flirt, still say, "I'm looking for something real." But in their eyes, you'll see it, that flicker of absence. The same man who used to open with vulnerability now guards his soul with politeness. The one who once asked about your dreams now just smiles and nods. And the worst part, they don't even know they've left. Why does this happen? Let's cut through the noise. It's not about alpha males or beta males. It's not about red pills or blue pills. It's about psychological erosion, the kind that builds over time, like a house slowly sinking into its own foundation. It starts with small betrayals. The time he opened up and was mocked. The time he cried and she said, "You're making me uncomfortable." The time he tried to be consistent and she called it boring. The time he stayed loyal and got replaced by someone exciting. One by one, those moments become internal files. Not bitter ones, just recorded. Until eventually a quiet thought settles in. It's not safe to love. Not because love hurts, but because love demands he abandon parts of himself. His stillness, his slowness, his honesty. Modern dating tells men, be vulnerable but not too needy. Be masculine but emotionally open. Be confident but don't be cocky. Be consistent but exciting. So what does he do? He performs. He adapts. He becomes whoever he thinks she wants. But underneath that adaptation, something dies. His authenticity, his voice, his core. And after enough rounds of this emotional shape-shifting, he stops playing. Not because he doesn't care, but because he's exhausted from caring wrong. Psychologist Dr. Ronald Levant calls this phenomenon normative male alexithymia, the cultural and emotional condition where men struggle to identify, express, or even access their inner world. But it's not because they're emotionally stunted, it's because they were trained out of themselves. As boys, they learned, suck it up, don't cry, be strong. As men, they're told the opposite. Open up, be emotionally intelligent, show your wounds. The switch is dizzying, and most men, they don't know which version of themselves is safe anymore. So they choose silence, withdrawal, neutrality. It feels safer. And this isn't just anecdotal. A 2023 survey by the Pew Research Center found that over 63% of single men under 30 are no longer actively pursuing romantic relationships, not because they're anti-love, but because they're disillusioned by it. When asked why, the most common answer wasn't sex or money. It was this: it's just not worth the emotional energy anymore. That's the part no one wants to admit. Men aren't walking away from love because they don't feel. They're walking away because they feel too much and have no place to put it. Here's what makes it worse. These men still crave connection, still want depth, still dream of someone who sees past the surface. But they've developed an internal equation. Authenticity plus vulnerability equals pain. Performance plus detachment equals peace. Even if it's a hollow peace. Even if it means slowly numbing themselves into quiet isolation. They stop texting first, stop opening up, stop trying to win someone over, and the world misreads it as apathy. But it's not apathy, it's self-protection. You may be wondering, why don't they just try again? Isn't that what real love takes? Of course. But ask yourself this, would you keep reaching out? If every time you did, the world taught you to regret it? Would you keep speaking? If your words were only valued when they matched someone else's script? Eventually you stop offering, not out of weakness, out of wisdom, a twisted kind of maturity. So what do these men do instead? They build lives without romantic anchors. They channel intimacy into work, hobbies, solitude. They develop rich inner worlds, but stop sharing them. They become the nice guy who's never fully present, the loyal friend who never commits, the emotionally intelligent man who smiles, listens, and stays distant. They're not broken, they're guarded, not because they can't love, but because they once did too deeply, too honestly, and the cost was too high. The truth is, many modern men haven't given up on love. They've just given up on trying to find it in places where they feel like they don't exist. They're not running, they're retreating, back into themselves, back into a version of life that demands less self-betrayal. And unless we learn to meet them in that silence without judging it, fixing it, or demanding they perform out of it, we may never hear what they were trying to say before they stopped speaking. There's a kind of suffering that doesn't show up in bruises, breakdowns, or tears. It hides in plain sight behind competence, stability, even a smile. It's not sadness, it's not even fear. It's existential despair, the quiet agony of a man living a life that's not his, because it's the only one the world ever gave him permission to live. Søren Kierkegaard, the 19th century Danish philosopher often called the father of existentialism, saw this long before modern psychology caught up. He wrote about the soul as something that must become itself, or suffer, not in chaos but in conformity, not in rebellion but in obedience to the wrong self. He called it the despair of not being oneself. And if you want to understand why so many men today are checking out, emotionally, romantically, spiritually, Kierkegaard left us a chilling roadmap. It starts with the false self. From boyhood, a man is assigned a script. Be strong, be dependable, be useful. Don't talk too much, don't feel too much, provide, protect, performance. And if he plays his role well, he gets applause, respect, praise, love. But none of it is for him. It's for the role, the mask. The image of masculinity, not the man behind it. At first it feels good, then it starts to rot, because every compliment is a reminder. They don't see me, they see who I've trained myself to be. And that realization is where despair begins. Kierkegaard said there are two kinds of despair. The first is the despair of not knowing you're in despair. The man who thinks he's fine, who says, "I'm good," while his inner world quietly dissolves. He distracts himself with achievement, routine, casual relationships. He smiles at the surface, while something deeper in him suffocates. The second kind is more brutal, but more honest. It's when he knows he's in despair, and now he must choose, keep living a lie, or tear the whole thing down. Most men never reach the second stage. It's too dangerous, too raw, too lonely. So they stay in the first, silent, successful, slowly dying inside. Now add modern love into the equation. A man meets someone. He feels a spark, a connection, maybe finally a chance to be seen. But instead of showing his raw self, he reaches for the role again, the provider, the protector, the stoic, the emotionally fluent but not too vulnerable guy. And it works, for a while. But inside, the question haunts him. If she loves me, is it really me she loves? Because if he's never been his real self, how could anyone love him for it? And so he starts to pull away, not because he doesn't care, but because he cares too much to risk finding out, maybe I'm unlovable without the mask. This isn't a failure of masculinity, it's a failure of integration. Kierkegaard wrote that despair is the result of a split between what we are and what we present to the world. and modern masculinity is built on that split. Men are trained to present control, reason, confidence. But inside, they often feel chaos, confusion, and shame. Not shame for doing wrong, but shame for being human. Shame for feeling lost. Shame for wanting to be held. Shame for not knowing how to stop performing. And this shame, it isolates. It separates men from intimacy, not just with others, but with themselves. Let's not romanticize this. Some men weaponize their pain, some become bitter, some turn to cynicism, dominance, or emotional coldness. But many, the ones no one talks about, they just shrink. They lose their spark. They stop dreaming. They trade love for safety, desire for numbness. And when they do fall in love, they often don't feel it fully because love requires you to be seen, and they've forgotten how to be visible without a costume. Kierkegaard believed that despair wasn't the enemy. It was the beginning of truth. He wrote, "The greatest hazard of all, to be oneself, in a world that is doing its best night and day to make you everybody else." That's what love demands, not more effort, not more charm, but the courage to be oneself. And for many men, that feels more terrifying than being alone. Because the man beneath the performance, he hasn't been welcomed in years. Not by society, not by partners, sometimes not even by himself. So what does all this mean? It means modern men aren't just avoiding love, they're avoiding the mirror. Because every relationship is a mirror, and most of them are afraid of what they'll see. It means the dating struggle isn't just logistical, it's spiritual. It's not about who texts first or who pays the bill. It's about the existential risk of saying, "So here I am, flawed, uncertain, real. Can you love me anyway?" And after years of being rewarded for being anyone but themselves, many men choose the safer path, retreat. But not all of them. Some, the brave few, confront the despair. They stop performing. They sit in the silence. They start becoming who they were before the world trained them out of it. And when they love again, it's different. It's not about earning or proving. It's about offering. Not a role, not a persona, but a soul. And that is the kind of love that doesn't burn men out. It builds them back. But it only begins when they stop trying to be a man and start becoming themselves. He picks her up when she's overwhelmed, listens when she cries, tells her she's beautiful when she feels broken. He's the safe space, the patient one, the strong one who doesn't ask for much, except maybe to be held in return. But here's the twist. When he finally does need support, he hesitates, pauses, and often says nothing. Not because he doesn't feel, but because he's learned something terrifying over time. Emotional labor is a one-way street, and men are expected to walk it alone. Let's define it. Emotional labor is the invisible work of managing feelings, both your own and other people's. It means regulating tone, smoothing conflict, showing up when others collapse, listening even when you're empty. It's often invisible. It's often unpaid. And in modern relationships, especially with emotionally intelligent men, it's quietly become a trauma factory. Because while the world loves a man who gets it, it rarely asks, but who gets him? Think about this. From a young age, boys are trained to suppress their emotions. Don't cry. Don't be weak. Toughen up. But when these boys become men, they enter a world that suddenly demands, open up, be emotionally available, hold space for me. So they try. They unlearn silence. They read the books, do the work, sit in therapy. And it works for a while. Women call them rare. Friends say, "You're so grounded." Everyone feels safe around them except them. Because emotional labor is rarely balanced. Men are expected to hold but not be held, to listen but not interrupt, to support but not collapse, to give but never seem to need. And slowly, invisibly, their own needs shrink. Not out of lack, but out of learned irrelevance. They begin thinking, her pain matters more. My sadness would just burden her. If I'm the strong one, I can't afford to fall apart. This isn't martyrdom. It's emotional survival training. Case in point, a 2018 study published in the Journal of Marriage and Family found that men in heterosexual relationships are far less likely to express emotional needs even when they feel intense distress. Why? Because many of them fear three things. 1. Being seen as weak. 2. Being emotionally invalidated. 3. Triggering discomfort in their partner. They don't want to make it worse, so they go quiet. smile more, perform emotional strength until it becomes a costume they can't take off. And what's even more brutal, when they do finally speak up, they're often met with confusion. Why didn't you tell me this earlier? You're usually so calm. I didn't know you were struggling. Because when a man trains the world to think he's unshakable, no one builds a safety net underneath him. So when he falls hard. And no one's there. Here's where it turns dark. Many men don't even realize they're burnt out from emotional labor until they hit a wall. Suddenly they feel emotionally numb, pull away from partners, stop caring about things that used to matter, fantasize about escape not from people but from expectations. It's not that they don't love anymore, it's that they're too tired to keep translating their needs into something palatable. Let's be real. In modern relationships, women are often more emotionally fluent, more practiced in self-expression, in identifying feelings and naming emotional needs. And that's beautiful. But here's the problem. Men are expected to match that fluency while also absorbing it. They're not just told to feel, they're told to be the container for someone else's feelings. But who holds them? Who says, you don't have to be okay today? You don't need to perform calmness for me. It's safe to need something. Very few. And over time, the emotional load they carry starts to feel like quiet trauma. Not from abuse, but from being chronically unseen in their softness. Even worse, men don't talk about this with each other. Because emotional labor doesn't look like trauma. There's no betrayal, no fight. Just the slow corrosion of feeling like a background character in your own emotional life. And so men begin to dissociate. They say less. They care less. They love less. Not because they want to, but because they've run out of bandwidth. This creates a tragic loop. The more emotional labor he performs, the less emotionally available he becomes for himself. The more he shows up, the less anyone thinks to check in on him. And eventually, when he does pull away, he's labeled cold, distant, shut down. But what if he's not cold? What if he's just empty? So what's the answer? It's not to stop caring, not to become stoic or emotionally numb. It's to reclaim emotional reciprocity, to remind men, your feelings are not a burden, your needs are not secondary, your exhaustion is not weakness. It's to make space for a new kind of masculinity, one that holds, yes, but is also held, one that listens, but is invited to speak, one that supports, but is allowed to break. Because emotional strength isn't just about containment, it's about capacity. And when that capacity is constantly filled with everyone else's feelings, there's no room left for his own. Maybe love hasn't failed men. Maybe it's just been one-sided for too long. And maybe, just maybe, the most radical thing a man can do is ask to be seen, fully, softly, without shame. He brings flowers. He compliments her dress. He texts good morning, good night. He's patient, polite, emotionally available, maybe even perfect. But something feels off, not dishonest, just rehearsed. Like love isn't something he feels, it's something he's delivering. As if he's playing a part and quietly hoping it's the right one. This isn't manipulation. It's not deception. It's what happens when a man is no longer sure what's real. Because love has become a performance. Let's talk about scripts. Every generation inherits one. A silent, invisible blueprint for what love is supposed to look like. For men, that script is deeply conflicted. He's told to lead, but not control. To protect, but not patronize. To express emotions but not too many. To chase, but never cling. He must be soft, but only at the right time. Strong, but only in the right way. Desirable, but never desperate. So what does he do? He performs. He studies the algorithm of attraction like a formula. Say the right words. Apologize with timing. Mirror emotional tone. Master vulnerability without losing masculine appeal. Not because he's fake, but because he's been taught that authenticity isn't enough. Modern dating has turned into an emotional marketplace. Swipe-based, strategy-based. Optimized for impressions, not intimacy. And in that marketplace, men learn quickly. Being genuine doesn't always win, but performance, that gets results. So they adjust. Not to deceive, but to survive romantic expectations. They memorize phrases like, I want a deep connection. I'm emotionally available. I support empowered women. And they mean it. But underneath the words, sometimes, they don't even know what they want anymore. because the performance has overwritten the instinct. Psychologist Dr. Gabor Mate once said, "The biggest loss is not the loss of love, it's the loss of self in the attempt to be loved." That's exactly what this is. Men lose touch with themselves not out of manipulation but out of adaptation. They become mirrors, shapeshifters, performers of intimacy, and ironically, the more they perform love, the less alive they feel inside it. This is where Kierkegaard returns in that haunting concept of inauthentic existence, the idea that we can live outwardly right while inwardly hollow. A man can plan dates, remember anniversaries, write sweet texts, and still feel completely unknown, even by the person sleeping next to him. Because when love is built on scripts, it's not a relationship, it's theater. And at some point he starts wondering, is this who I am, or just who I've learned to be to earn affection? That doubt, it spreads like rot beneath the surface. Here's the tragic part. Women often sense the performance and mistake it for disinterest. They say things like, "He's nice, but I don't feel connected. He does everything right, but something's missing. He's emotionally available, but it feels flat." Because connection isn't just what is said, it's where it's said from. And if a man is operating from behind a mask, even a beautifully crafted one, love feels like a transaction, not a revelation. This is not a male failure, it's a cultural failure. We've trained men to be palatable, to avoid being too intense, too aloof, too emotional, too soft, too slow. And in the process, we've created a generation of men who are emotionally fluent, but emotionally disembodied. They can name their feelings, but rarely feel safe expressing them without judgment or correction. So they stick to what works, the template, the emotionally safe version of themselves. But love, real love, is never safe. It's chaotic, it's vulnerable, it's unhinged at times. And that's exactly what performance can never be. Think of how many men say, "I don't even know how to flirt anymore. I don't know what women want. I feel like I'm always doing it wrong." What they're really saying is, "I've lost the ability to be without performing." And that loss, it's not romantic, it's existential. The more love becomes a stage, the more men feel like actors, memorizing lines, hitting cues, trying not to drop the emotional beat. Until finally the curtain falls, and they exit. Not because they don't want love, but because the performance costs them too much. They long for a version of love that doesn't require constant calibration, where silence is allowed, where "I don't know what I feel" isn't punished, where being off script isn't a deal breaker. So how does this end? Not with more effort, not with better dating strategies, but with a risk. To stop performing, to speak clumsily, to feel messily, to love imperfectly and still be worthy. That's the real rebellion. To be raw in a world that rewards polish. To be honest in a world addicted to emotional intelligence as performance art. Because performance might win attention, but only authenticity earns love that feels real. The question isn't, why are men giving up on love? It's, what kind of love did we offer them if it required them to abandon themselves? It doesn't start with a dramatic goodbye. There's no slam door, no emotional meltdown, no tearful monologue about not being understood. It begins with quiet, a silence that doesn't scream, it withdraws. He stops asking how you slept, stops reaching for your hand during movies. He laughs at the right moments, replies to texts, does all the right things, but you feel it that he's gone. Not physically, existentially, because some men don't leave love by walking away. They leave by disappearing inside it. This is the return to silence, not the peace of solitude, but the protective silence of a man who once offered the rawest parts of himself and learned that doing so left him exposed. So he retreats, not out of cruelty, not out of pride, but as a kind of soul damage control. He no longer believes that anyone will meet him where he actually lives, in the messy, undefined space beyond his roles. So he stops inviting people in. And here's the painful paradox. This kind of silence isn't the absence of love, it's the burial of it. Love is still there, in his glance, in his worry, and the way he still shows up, pays bills, sends check-in messages, but it's not shared anymore. It's internalized because sharing love requires vulnerability, and vulnerability for him has become costly, not just emotionally, but existentially. This silence is not new, it's ancient. Men have always been trained to retreat into caves, literal and metaphorical, to carry pain with dignity, to protect others from the full weight of their grief, their confusion, their hunger for connection. But what happens when the cave becomes permanent, when silence is no longer a tool, but a home? He starts confusing numbness with peace, stillness with self-control, emptiness with strength. And the tragedy? No one notices. Because a man in silence often looks functional. Kierkegaard warned of this. He wrote that despair doesn't always scream. It often smiles, lives quietly, functions beautifully. But beneath that polished exterior, there's a soul asking a terrifying question. If I stop being useful, will I still be loved? And when a man's worth is tied entirely to what he can do rather than who he is, silence becomes his shield. Because at least in silence, he doesn't risk rejection for simply existing. But let's be clear, this is not apathy. The man who withdraws into silence is not giving up on love, he's giving up on performing it. He's done with strategies, done with decoding mixed signals, done with trying to be emotionally articulate, yet masculine, yet spontaneous, yet safe. He doesn't want to be a therapist, or a guru, or a high-value man. He wants to be real, but in a world that rewards only curated authenticity, silence feels like the last honest thing left. And so he returns to solitude, to self-reflection, to peace that doesn't demand performance. He reclaims hobbies he abandoned trying to impress. He reads, lifts, walks, works. And slowly, quietly, he rebuilds, not for someone else, for himself, not to prove worth, but to remember it. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Some men heal in silence and never come back. They find a version of themselves untouched by romantic chaos, a version that feels whole, undisturbed, free. And when love knocks again, they hesitate. Because love, in their experience, required constant output, required suppressing natural instincts, censoring truth, apologizing for needs. So they think, why go back? Why trade this peace for the hope that someone might understand me? And unless they meet a radically different kind of love, one that doesn't demand performance, doesn't punish stillness, doesn't require constant emotional translation, they won't return. Not because they hate women, not because they fear intimacy, but because they've discovered something deeper than validation, the sanctity of their own silence. But not all silence is exile. Sometimes it's preparation. A man who chooses solitude doesn't always stay there. Some emerge stronger, clearer, more boundaried, more whole. They come back to love with a new question. Can you meet me here in this stillness without asking me to speak in ways that aren't mine? Not as a demand, but as a test. Not of her worth, but of his safety. So what does it take to reach a man who's returned to silence? Not pressure, not noise, not fixing, but presence. A presence that doesn't ask him to explain every emotion. A presence that sits with silence and doesn't flinch. A presence that says, you don't have to perform here, you can just be. That's the real invitation. Not to pull him out, but to walk in without fear of the dark. In the end, the modern man's journey with love isn't about victory or conquest. It's about integration, of softness and strength, of reason and instinct, of desire and detachment, of noise and silence. And maybe, just maybe, he's not giving up on love. He's giving up on the version of it that told him he had to become someone else to be worthy. And in that surrender, he finds something purer, a love that speaks quietly, but rings true. Right now, there are 2 videos on your screen, handpicked just for you. Click to watch them. I'm sure you'll love every second.